So when I received Judith's invitation to talk about why Harvard, I laughed at first because I thought, you want me to talk about why Harvard? Are you kidding? I'm Asian. That's like asking me why rice. The Asians, as many of you know, have a real love affair with Harvard for decades due to their reverence for education. And I could hear my grandmother's voice, with her thick Korean accent ringing in my ears. Harvard #1. Or my father, who told me that, you'll go to Harvard or you won't go anywhere. So in all seriousness, I'm really delighted to be here to talk to you. And as you might see from my bio, I did my undergraduate work here, also my graduate work, and now I've just returned this past fall as a faculty member in the Department of Architecture. But though not part of my formal bio, but part of my personal history, is the fact that my 2 siblings and my husband all have affiliations with Harvard in diverse fields. My brother is an organic chemist, and he completed his postdoctorate work with the renowned David Evans Lab. My older sister, though she did her undergraduate work at that lesser developed school in New Haven, she subsequently returned to her senses and earned her MBA here at HBS. So we were actually roommates in graduate school, and while I was slaving away over my drafting board, I can assure any potential HBS folks in the crowd that in witnessing their parties, I saw firsthand that the B School students do know how to have a good time. So, and then of course my husband and partner in practice completed his professional degree in architecture here at the GSD. And he actually asked me out on our first date just outside in the lobby. So one other possible reason to come here, you might even be lucky enough to find your soulmate. So during this span of time, throughout the 90s, we had a full array, a rainbow, if you will, of Harvard experiences. And I know that each one of us, despite our different stories and paths to this university, if we were given the opportunity to do it all again, I can sincerely say that we would choose Harvard. So there are numerous reasons to attend. But upon reflection and based on the collective personal experiences of my family, I feel that there is one particularly strong reason, and that I believe that this reason is something that connects all of our experiences across the range of our disciplines. This reason, foremost in my mind, is the strong relationships that we have forged with the faculty at the university. And I'd like to just share some thoughts on this idea to provide you a sense of what it has meant to me, and to give you just the kind of breadth and depth of these relationships in my case. As a Harvard undergrad, deeply interested in the arts and painting in particular, I wrote a term paper for the Visual and Environmental Studies Department on Saarinen, an architect who had produced a couple of buildings at MIT that I was able to see in person. The professor for this course encouraged me at that time to pursue my interest in the arts and to pursue the field of architecture specifically, supporting me to enter the GSD as a senior of Harvard College. Let's call him Professor A. And he was instrumental in helping me to navigate the graduate school curriculum, particularly as I was its youngest student, and really very, very nervous about just being able to keep up. So once in grad school, I was assigned a first-year studio professor. It was a random assignment of Professor B, who later became my thesis advisor and who offered me my first job upon graduating from the GSD. Another Professor C offered me connection to accomplished architecture firms in London and Vienna, where I worked during the summers throughout graduate school. So upon graduating, as I mentioned, Professor B gave me that very first official professional experience as a project architect, allowing me to collaborate on the research and development of a window patent and cladding system. And Professor B provided me with an opportunity to cut my teeth building my first project, an innovative house in Brookline, Massachusetts. So shortly after beginning work, I was married, and Professor A, to the guy who asked me out in the lobby over there, Professor A and B and other professors, D, E, and F, attended my wedding. Before we danced the night away, Professor E delivered a poignant reading in his much beloved Irish accent, which was really the highlight of our wedding service. As time passed, I was interested in working in a larger practice, and I reached out to Professor G, who connected me to his wife. As principal, his wife directs one of the most distinguished practices in Boston with a breadth of collegiate architecture experience. Professor G's wife and her colleagues offered me my first opportunities to design on multi-million-dollar construction projects at a number of institutions, including Wesleyan, Mount Union College, Agnes Scott College, and others. So after practicing for several years, I was actually interested in returning to academia. And I had to figure out how to make this happen after I had been in practice for these past years. So I renewed my contact with Professor H, who had been my academic advisor throughout my graduate years and who had taken me, along with a dozen other GSD students, on a design studio trip to Valparaiso, Chile. And he was really quite an extraordinary mentor. Professor H coached me on the preparation of a teaching dossier and served as a reference in my faculty position search. So when I was offered a number of different positions at several universities, it was Professor H who sat me down with me to discuss the pros and cons of each position, its location, and we debated the best fit for my aspirations. Meanwhile, there was Professor J, whose opinion actually differed from Professor H's, and cautioned me that, wherever I chose to go to begin my academic career, that I might suffer from the inevitable collision between my professional goals, my academic responsibilities, and my family life. So, on the first day as a shiny new assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin, Professor J promptly sent me a fax, kind of a long time ago, of an article on the trials of women in academia and how I might manage the challenges of gender discrimination, or a kind of gender tax, should it arise. So being one of a very small handful of women on a predominantly male faculty, Professor J was really looking out for me, and I was so grateful for this kind of support. So, life was very busy. My academic career had begun, and simultaneously I had opened my new architecture practice with my husband, La Dahlman Architects. And within 1 month of the firm's emergence, we won our first competition, and we immediately panicked. What happens if you actually win? Particularly if winning results in a commission of a design for a 30-story tower. That's really scary if you've never done one before. How do you write the contract for that, and how do you manage its publication and dissemination? So we reached out to Professor B and Professor D, who would coach us through those initial questions. Our practice grew, and so did our family, with the birth of our 2 sons. And there was Professor J, who sent me a beautiful photo album to celebrate the birth of my first child and to coach me through work-life balance issues as we dealt with sleep deprivation and the pressures of life as practitioners, academics, and new parents. So Professor J was again a solid foundation for me and a role model at the birth of my second child, who happened, and all this happened to collide, as Professor J predicted years earlier, with my tenure review. Not a good confluence of events. So over the following years, I would see many faculty, mentors in various places, in conferences, and at other institutions we would cross paths. And all the while, these professors were always willing to offer advice and constructive guidance on such an array of issues, both professional and personal. And sometimes through a quick phone call or email here and there, and sometimes a long lunch or a morning coffee. So more recently, in 2012, I was considering academic leadership opportunities as I contemplated the possibility of a deanship. And so I reached out to Professor M for advice, who was the program director at Harvard back in my graduate school days, and who had also written all of the references for me for my faculty review and promotion from assistant to associate professor. And this was at University of Wisconsin. So Professor M shared with me the challenges of academic leadership and also took the time to help me consider if that particular school was a good fit for me. Professor M also encouraged me to think about returning to Harvard. And lest you worry that these people are actually for real, in fact, Professor M is Mohsen Mosafavi. And if you know him, I know you heard from him earlier in the weekend, he's very persuasive. So it was impossible for me to say no, and here I am today. So I'm just offering you this detail to share with you a glimpse of how deeply the faculty has touched my life, how at every turn and major decision, I've been able to reach back to my roots at Harvard to find the support, concrete advice, and mentorship, and ultimately friendship. I would have been grateful to have just one or two faculty members to whom I could seek advice, but that I can count over a dozen, more than 4 times the number of my years as a graduate student. These folks who've really inspired my imagination about the transformative potential of architecture, who have shaped not only my graduate school experience, but also 2 decades of the arc of my professional and personal life. It is a testament to the dedication and commitment of the faculty and to the endurance of a Harvard education. So I'm aware that all of you may be deciding about whether or not Harvard is the right fit for you, and I wish you really well in this decision process, and I hope you will choose Harvard, as did I and as did members of my family who have communicated to me very similar experience, and again, in a very diverse set of fields. I know it may appear to be a daunting place. It's clearly a vibrant place, as you can see by all of the faces in this room, but it is filled with people who are genuine and caring, and with whole hearts and whole minds, who will challenge you, very, very much challenge you, and who are really firing at all systems intellectually and as people. So it's a place where you'll meet and develop interactions that will extend well beyond your graduate studies. These are relationships that are really of a lifetime. Thank you.